Holy words long preserved for our walk in this world. They resound with God's own heart. Oh, let the ancient words impart. Words of life, words of hope, give us strength, help us cope in this world where'er we roam. Ancient words will guide us home. Ancient words ever true, changing me and changing you. We have come with open hearts. Oh, let the ancient words impart. Holy words of our faith, handed down to this age, come to us through sacrifice. Oh, heed the faithful word of Christ. Holy words long preserved for our walk in this world. They resound with God's own heart. Oh, let the ancient words impart. Ancient words ever true, changing me and changing you. We have come with open hearts. Oh, let the ancient words impart. Ancient words ever true, changing me and changing you. We have come with open hearts. Oh, let the ancient words impart. Ancient words ever true, changing me and changing you. We have come with open hearts. Oh, let the ancient words impart. We have come with open hearts. Oh, let the ancient words impart.
And good afternoon. Welcome to Searching for the Truth. It is a beautiful Friday afternoon. It is Friday, and that's just the 12th. Now, I know I changed that. Oh, well, today is the 26th, not the 12th. I don't know why. Too many things going on this afternoon. Hey, it's good to be with you. I appreciate very much you joining me. And as you can see here on the chart, the date's not right, but everything else I think is. Marriage, divorce, and remarriage is what we are going to be discussing this afternoon. We're going to be responding to a video that has been sent to me by Robert Waters about 3 weeks ago now, even running back before that. There have been some discussions with Robert on this particular issue. At first, we were trying to get him to come live with us and come into not necessarily the studio here with me, but join us live online and discuss this matter personally, directly, and live before a viewing audience, more or less a debate, if you will. But Robert asked, even after we had worked out some of the details, I was going to give him 10 minutes to go through his speech and without interrupting him, and then let him go through that speech, and then I get to respond and ask questions, and then we would proceed to have dialogue from that point, which I agreed to. But since he asked if he could send a video in, which I said okay. So that's what he did. He said it was, he started out with 10 minutes, and then it was 18 minutes, and now it's 22 minutes. The video itself is 22 minutes long, which is okay. But we're going to go through that video. We're going to examine what Robert teaches on this matter, and we're going to talk about it. one last time. One last time. Doesn't mean we'll never talk about marriage, divorce, or remarriage again, but this is I think it's going to be the last time for Robert and I to discuss this issue. So here we go. What does Deuteronomy 24 really teach? We've already talked about these things, by the way. We've talked about these things live, and we have invited discussion on these matters. We've invited people. Even after we've done all of that, our phone lines are open. The text messaging is open. People can comment live as we go through our studies, and it's just really, really interesting. And Jeff is here. He's going to try to join me live, I think. So we'll see how that works out. Jeff, I sent you a link on your phone. If you can get a hold of that, and I'll plug you in, brother. I'll plug you in, and we can have a discussion on this. But we're going to discuss these things one last time, as I said. Deuteronomy 24. Also, we're going to talk about Matthew 19, of course. And we're going to examine 1 Corinthians chapter 7 because that was brought up in the video. And so what I want to do is I want to go ahead and I want to play some of that. I want to begin by, here's a quote, 1 minute and 59 seconds in. Jesus was not an advocate of forbidding people from marrying. Instead, he inspired an apostle to write that it is the doctrine of devils. We're going to see about that. I guess before we get started, again, appreciate everybody being with us. Chris is here. Awesome. Thank you. Whoops. Double click instead of just single click. Try that again. All right. Great to have you. Good afternoon. Sheila is here. Great to have Sheila with us again. Trenton is with us. Good to have you. Ashton is here as well. If Robert's understanding of to put away is debunked, then every part of his position disintegrates. And Jeff, I sent you a link. If you can, when you can wait until we get done playing the video, that's fine. When you get a moment, you can join us. Evelyn, glad to have you with us. Appreciate it very much. And Trenton also says, is there unwillingness to just join live, or what is the deal? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. I know that he prefers written debates, in fact, instead of in-person live Bible discussions. He had agreed to a debate with Jeff Asher on continual cleansing, and he, even though he denies it, he did back out of that. They never could agree to terms. So let's do this. Let's begin, and I'm just going to play some of this. In the beginning was I had agreed to give Robert 10 minutes without interruption, but since he sent in a video, I'm not going to be interrupting his thoughts or anything like that when I break in, so that's not going to be a deal. But I'm going to make some comments as we go through. I'm going to try to limit those comments, and then afterwards go back and go through everything. But just make some comments as we go through and kind of tell you where we're going as we go. So, all right. I'm going to do it because I agreed to. Okay, I agreed to let Robert have his say. So, here it is.
Thanks for joining us in this study of does the quoting Matthew 19:9 settle the divorce and remarriage issue? This is a reply to Don McClain's comment that he made on his podcast after I explained that the Greek word apoluo does not mean divorce as God defined it, and that this proves that his teaching that the divorced are not eligible for marriage is contrary to Jesus' teaching. He replied that the context of Matthew 19:9 shows that Jesus was speaking of divorce, rather than men sending their wives away without divorcing them so that they could go be another man's wife as the law commanded and the law allowed. In this study, we will show that the context, along with other passages, supports the belief that Jesus was referring to women who was not divorced, and because of this would commit adultery if she married. He was speaking of a woman who was apoluo, if you will, sent away, resulting in separation, leaving the marriage intact. It is essential to consider all the teachings on the subject and to draw a conclusion that harmonizes all pertinent passages. Depending on just one passage to understand divorce and marriage is unwise. It just is unwise as choosing a single verse about faith while ignoring other passages that relate to salvation. We find God's law on marriage and divorce in the Old Testament, and it's timeless. It's a timeless law. Virtually all scholars agree that Jesus did not contradict this law, Moses' law, but some whom I've debated suggest that he did. Others try to get around this problem by denying and or twisting Moses' teaching. Hopefully, once you see that Jesus did not contradict Moses, you will accept the reasonable explanation of verse 9. Jesus was not an advocate of forbidding people from marrying. Instead, he inspired an apostle to write that it is a doctrine of devils. Understanding divorce and marriage can be challenging. While several passages clearly indicate that divorced individuals are not disqualified for marriage, clarifying Jesus' teaching is often also necessary, and that's what we intend to do in this study. But first, there are some things that we can establish that may help you to see and grasp the truth of Matthew 19:9, which many feel is all that they need and which settles the matter. In several writings, all of which are available on my website, we have established among God's people that the timeless law concerning marriage and divorce clearly permitted a woman who had been divorced to go be another man's wife. This aspect of the law is rooted in Scripture and has been affirmed throughout Jewish history. Some may deny that the law permitted a divorced woman to remarry, but such a denial is futile. Rejecting this truth amounts to wresting the Scriptures, which is best described as unbelief. It is essential to acknowledge what the law actually states, rather than attempting to reinterpret or dismiss these passages. As an Old Testament prophet, Jesus was required to teach God's law on divorce. His response to the Pharisees' question, "What did Moses command you?" indicates that he viewed Moses as the main authority. We read back in Matthew chapter 5:17, where Jesus said, "Think not that I'm come to destroy the law of the prophets. I'm not come to destroy, but to fulfill." This was said before his first teaching on this matter. The tradition of many has him not keeping his promise there. And if Jesus taught contrary to established and current law, it would have been a sin, giving the Jews a reason to kill him. But they, his enemies, did not even accuse Jesus of contradicting Moses. His enemies would not do what so-called friends are doing. We have shown that apoluo is often incorrectly translated as divorce, and that translators who did so drastically altered what Jesus intended to teach. Many versions have translated this properly. We have shown that punishing innocent people for the sins of others goes against God's character. We have shown that the Apostle Paul, who answered questions from Christians about marriage, gave some straightforward answers that are easy to see if one is not reading them through traditional lenses. He commanded to let every man and every woman have a spouse, and he gave the reason for it, which is to avoid fornication. He followed up by addressing the unmarried, which includes the divorced, by commanding, let them marry. And in the same chapter, he brought up those bound, which would be those married, and then those loosed, that would be include the divorced, and stated that the loosed do not sin if they marry. Some, when challenged by Paul's straightforward commands, cite 1 Corinthians 7:10-11 as if to suggest he must not have meant what he said. We have shown that this passage is not even about divorce, but about a woman who departs, as the text says, resulting in nothing but separation. They need to reconcile, not get married again. The word usually translated unmarried in this text can indicate that the woman was divorced or that she was single. And some versions reflect that she was to remain single, and some say in the state that she is in. Bloomfield, the Greek New Testament, well respected on this passage, says from the use of the word reconcile and the area of the context, it is plain that the apostle is not speaking of formal divorces affected by law, but separations whether agreed on or not, arising from misunderstandings or otherwise. She is instructed to remain as she is, as single or reconciled with her husband. If she were divorced, the situation would be different. Unfortunately, rather than accepting the Apostle Paul's straightforward teachings, some choose to distort a passage to make it appear contradictory, misleading others into believing they have successfully disputed the point. We have shown that there was indeed a problem with putting away but not providing divorce papers. There was a motive and opportunity for the Jewish men to put away but not divorce. It was so that they could keep the dowry the woman's father gave him at the wedding. We have shown that the exception clause is not about a reason or a basis or cause for divorce, but about the case where a man is not guilty of adultery against her, Mark 10:3, if he sends her away without obeying Moses' command that would free her to marry. The applicable case would be when the relationship involves fornication, not where one has been unfaithful. And we have demonstrated that there are two examples of this in the New Testament, Matthew 14 and 1 Corinthians 5. Some brethren reject the facts regarding the meaning of apoluo as it is commonly used, and the fact that it is only part of the divorce process and therefore cannot be the whole. Yet they assert that the context supports their contention that Jesus said a divorced woman would commit adultery if she married. All right, let's now take a close look at Matthew 19:3 through 10 and address the argument that Jesus used the word apoluo to mean divorce as defined by Moses, which is the foundation for the teaching that a divorcee commits adultery upon marrying again. All right. The Pharisees also came to him, tempting him and saying to him, "Is it lawful for a man to put away his wife for every cause?" Here the Pharisees used the word apoluo in their question. King James Version renders it put away. Our English dictionaries do not give divorce as a meaning for put away. It is not clear whether they had divorce in mind or what they said, put away. But Jesus, knowing that a mere sending away is not divorce, and that it had always been God's ideal that marriage be for life, replied, saying, "Have you not read that he which made them at the beginning made them male and female, and said, for this cause shall a man leave his father and mother, and shall cleave to his wife, and they shall twain be one flesh? Wherefore they are no more twain, but one flesh. What therefore God hath joined together, let not man put asunder." First, Jesus reminds them of God's original plan, evidently as a rebuke for their treacherous acts and how they were treating their wives. The latter part of this passage says, "Let not man put asunder." Some have argued that with this comment, Jesus changed the law in teaching that divorce does not end marriage. But what does it say? Let not man put asunder. Man can't dissolve a marriage his way. He can try. But that doesn't mean a marriage can't be dissolved God's way, which is outlined in Deuteronomy 24:1 and 2, and confirmed in Jeremiah 3 verse 8, where God divorced Israel using that very law. Jesus' statement showing that he recognized there was confusion between putting away and an actual divorce, as God's command makes clear, is in verse 7 of our text, and also Mark 10 verse 3. Verse 7 says, "They say unto him, why did Moses then command to give a writing of divorcement and to put her away?" Well, first we observe that the Pharisees understood that the writing of divorcement was a command. Second, they not only recognized it as a command, but also understood that divorce and putting away are two distinct actions. Jesus' response to Mark's account, "What did Moses command you?" serves as further evidence of this distinction. Third, it is clear from their defensive demeanor that the Jews understood Jesus to be condemning their unfaithfulness to their wives, whether through divorce or simply putting them away. In Mark's account, Jesus clearly indicated that a man who deliberately refuses to set his wife free by issuing a divorce decree and instead cast her out without proper documentation is acting treacherously towards her and effectively committing adultery against her. All right, verse 11. Moses, because of the hardness of your hearts, suffered you to put away your wives. But from the beginning, it was not so. By giving the reason or need for divorce, hardness of hearts, is it reasonable to conclude that Jesus at that instant changed what God had established? Can you imagine the response from the people of the world if that had happened? It was not divorce that was permitted, but putting away. There was no punishment for it. There was no punishment for them doing that. What would be accomplished by punishing couples who separate? The idea that a divorcee is only eligible to marry if she initiates it for fornication. Think about it. It promotes a race to the courthouse. It is counterproductive, casting doubt on whether this teaching truly originated with God. Since apoluo does not mean divorce, it was not divorce that Moses suffered, permitted, or tolerated. Divorce was a command if a man wanted to end a marriage. Moses did not penalize separations. Instead, he allowed it. This approach was deemed appropriate because reconciliation between the parties remained possible. God required a bill of divorcement. Some men avoided giving it to keep the dowry. Under the law, men could have multiple.
Oh, I got to pause it right here for just a second. I'm sorry. I can't take any more. And I also have to, oops, I got to get my mouse over here where I can work here. And I can get Jeffrey up on the screen with me. I'm going to see if I can add Jeff and well, what happened here? Oh. Speaker and all seen. Oh, there we go. There we go. And I also got to unmute you, Jeff. I cut your mic off so people wouldn't hear you breathing while they now, but why? Okay. No. All right. Why can I not unmute you, Jeff? No audio source. All right. Asher, how are you? Well, I said I promised him 10 minutes and I gave him let's see how much. 12 minutes and 57 seconds. Well, yeah. That's yeah. Well, that's interesting because what he's saying is Moses permitted them to just send their wives away without divorcing them. He permitted that, but the command is to write that bill of divorcement. When in truth, in reality, as you just pointed out, it's not. He permitted them to write the bill of divorcement. Compare Mark's account with Matthew's account. And we're going to do that. Let me let's see. Caller, you are live and on the air. Do you have a question or comment?
Yeah, I would like to make a comment. How you doing, Brother
Oh,
Don?
I'm doing fine. We're trying to review this video here. What's on your mind, Ernest?
I understand. I can only comment on this on my experiences having gotten married young and my life and starting to have our first child out of wedlock. Um, the scripture says something to the fact: do not look up that no one should look upon one's beauty uh, as a way. We should look upon each other's beauty. First of all, the outward appearance is what I had something with when I got married. And first of all, I was sort of swept off my feet, sort of too, uh, and having not been established. And I want to make this short. Having not been established myself and going into marriage at a young age and started having children, I was working at the time. But then there's so many things that will lead one to say, to question marriage. True. Uh, all sorts of things. Infidelity, adultery, being adulterer, adulteress, or whatnot. Now, with all that, I made my bed. I went into it. We both went into that, to marriage. Though we chose each other. God brought Eve to Adam, and they still had trouble, right? The serpent still came in. Now, when we get over to Genesis, I want to say Genesis chapter 6, where the sons of God, they saw that the daughters of men were fair to look upon, and they chose of all. God said his spirit would not continue to dwell with man. Now, I see selfishness that I had within myself. Even though I was led, I was
Well,
I was told that, I was told I didn't mean to lead you on, okay? But we married. I married on my morals
yeah. Hey,
because I knew it was right.
Ernest, if you'd like to call back another day and talk about this, I mean, we've got this
Uh-huh.
video that this is basically a debate, or we're trying to review this video. Um,
Okay.
and
Okay.
and so we were kind of crunched for time this afternoon. If you could call
Yeah.
back later another day and talk about that, if you've got something to say about this
Okay.
particular video, or you got a point that you'd like to make real quick, you make that point. But we do need to get on with it.
Okay.
Okay?
Okay. I'm gonna make a point because you have children involved too, right? How are they gonna feel when dad or mom wants to, whatever problems they have, they need to solve. It's going to affect the children also. So I just wanted to say that I believe God would call us to peace, all us to peace in marriage or whatever it is we're going through in life. So, but with that, I just want to say it affects not only me. And I can't be selfish in trying to go on,
Well,
even though she may choose to go on with her life, and that's fine.
that's
But
true.
God has called us to peace. And I just wanted to, stop right there with that.
Okay. Well, thanks, Ernest. Appreciate your call.
Have
Call
a
back.
good
We'll
day.
talk about the rest of it later. All right. So, Ernest, yeah, and it's true. Marriage, divorce, and remarriage is a complicated issue because it does affect lives. I mean, it really does. And there's no such thing as a divorce taking place where there's no sin involved and where people are not hurt. But yeah, Jeff, you were talking about his distinction. In fact, I asked him a question last year. Well, what did Moses permit? What did Jesus say Moses permitted? He finally said putting away, which he makes a distinction between that and divorcing. So Moses permitted them to just kick their wives out of the house without giving them that bill of divorcement. But his command was to give it a bill of divorcement. That doesn't make sense. Right. Like, Well, and I think that's what Jesus is explaining in Matthew 19. So, okay, I just wanted to stop and make that point that Robert's distinction between Moses permitting them to put away their wives and commanding them to divorce their wives are two different things is absurd. Absurd, completely absurd. So, I just want to make that point. So, Jeff, can you listen to the next 10 minutes of this without? Well, I don't know if I can, but we're going to try. And okay, so we're going to pick up right here, starting Matthew 19, and then we're going to go through all of this.
For
Okay.
wives, so they often put away a wife without formal divorce, leaving both parties technically still married. They only had to give her the dowry if they actually divorced her according to law. A woman put away was unable to marry because, without a formal release as specified by Moses, she would be considered an adulteress. Only their proper release granted her the right to marry again. This act of putting away was a treacherous deed by the husband, which Jesus called adultery against her. Now let's get to verse 9. Whosoever shall put away his wife, except it be for fornication, and shall marry another, committeth adultery. And whoso marrieth her which is put away doth commit adultery. When you take this text for what it says, you will not be faced with any hermeneutical problems, nor will you feel the need to preach something that results in breaking up legal marriages and imposing celibacy on people who need marriage to avoid fornication and turning people away from the Lord, as often happens. But if you insert divorce in the place of put away, like a lot of new versions do, you are immediately faced with grave hermeneutical problems, such as the fact that for it to be true, Jesus must have changed the law, which would have been a sin and which would have given the Jews reason to kill him. Jesus' use of the word apoluo in its usual sense aligned with the law of Moses that allowed the woman who received the divorce papers to go be another man's wife. Some believe Jesus changed the law on specific issues using phrases like, "You have heard it said, but I say unto you." But he did not oppose God's law as delivered by Moses. He was addressing the false notions of the Jews. At his trial, no one accused him of contradicting the law or condemning divorced individuals to celibacy. Just imagine the outrage had he been guilty of that. Note a paraphrase of verse 9 that helps clarify the intended meaning of Jesus' words or of the text. Whoever shall send his wife out of the house and marry another commits adultery against her, unless he sent her away because of fornication, which is being committed because of the unlawful relationship. The above must be the meaning because the divorce law was intended for the woman's benefit, and without it, there would have been no condemnation for the men's evil practice that Jesus called adultery against her. The Pharisees may have been referring to legal divorce when they asked Jesus about putting away at first, as many people today do. Regardless, Jesus addressed their words. When Moses was referenced, the Pharisees responded by specifically mentioning both put away and bill of divorcement, demonstrating their awareness that Jesus was not falling for their trap and was indeed redirecting the conversation. It makes sense that Jesus returned to their initial inquiry about putting away, which can clearly occur without formally issuing a bill of divorcement, and that he made his latter remarks with this distinction in mind. The exception clause in Matthew 19:9 is one of the most frequently misunderstood passages in the Bible, and its interpretation has far-reaching implications. It has been construed to mean that to be eligible to remarry after divorce, one must initiate a divorce for adultery. But Jesus said fornication, not adultery, and it refers to unlawful marriages rather than divorce eligibility. Besides, adultery was a capital offense. We find a case of illegal marriages in Ezekiel 10 and verse 11. It says, now therefore make confession unto the Lord God of your fathers and do his pleasure and separate yourselves from the people of the land and from the strange wives. God gave no command to divorce those strange wives. Why? They were not legal marriages. The relationships were displeasing to God and needed to be ended because of fornication. The translators of the New Jerusalem Bible were on the right track in their wording of a parallel passage, Matthew 5:32, when they said or translated it, except for the case of an illicit marriage. Now, Matthew 19 and verse 10 from the Good News Bible, his disciples said to him, if this is how it is between a man and his wife, it's better not to marry. First, it was not the Pharisees, but the disciples who commented on Jesus' teaching. They were concerned about the relationship. Certainly, they were not intending to place doubt upon the wisdom of God in instituting marriage. They understood Jesus to be saying that if the marriage is not legitimate, not legal, such as the case where the woman is a forbidden foreign wife, a brother's ex-wife, or other forbidden relatives, it is best not to marry that particular person. Note what was said, the King James Version. Note what was actually said. If the case of the man be so with his wife or with his woman. What case? Case of him marrying after a divorce? No, the man could have more than one wife. The only thing that fits here, the only thing that makes sense is that the disciples understood that it was better for a man not to marry if it was incest, included in the word fornication, which would be living in sin. Which is the most logical conclusion? That they understood Jesus to be talking about a divorced couple, or that further remarriage was prohibited, or that it would have been better for the man not to have married someone prohibited by law. Now, someone might argue that verse 9 says the man commits adultery. Indeed, he does. But in Mark 10 and verse 11, Jesus explains the man's sin when he said he committeth adultery against her. It was against the woman that he put away, but did not divorce. Not against someone he divorced or with someone he might marry after the divorce. Now, Matthew 19, verse 11, Good News Bible, Jesus answered, this teaching does not apply to everyone, but only to those whom God has given it. The teaching only applied to those whose marriage was illegal or unscriptural and incestuous, which is fornication. This exegesis is logical, it's scriptural, and hermeneutically sound, and it presents God, Jesus, his apostles, and his disciples as fair and just. All should be able to accept the teachings in this lesson, because the original teachings of God on marriage is respected. No families need to split up if their marriage is legal, and legally divorced people, whether innocent of sin or not, need not remain celibate. The practice of requiring celibacy contradicts the very reason given for divorce, for marriage, 1 Corinthians 7, verse 2, and is direct disobedience to several clear commands. Marriage can be dissolved legally, contrary to Catholic decree, and those who have experienced an unhappy divorce are no longer bound. The teachings of Paul clearly support this. There is no biblical evidence for breaking up legal marriages and imposing celibacy. When a divorce occurs, one or both parties may have sinned, but those sins can be forgivable just like any other. Last thing that should happen to someone disheartened by a divorce is to be required to maintain a permanent position that makes striving to live the Christian life even more difficult. Preachers and elders should listen to and heed the Apostle Paul's command to let them marry, and his reasoning for it, to avoid fornication, and if loosed or divorced, that they do not sin by marrying. The truth is supported by much evidence, whereas the erroneous position's basis is nothing more than an inaccurate translation of a single word. Galatians chapter 1 verse 10 says, "For do I now persuade men or God? Or do I seek to please men? For if I yet pleased men, I should not be the servant of Christ." Preachers who want to please God do not preach what is most acceptable among their brethren, but what is right and true. You have heard the truth. The question now is, do you have the courage to accept and stand for the truth?
Okay, that was Robert Waters' video, and I'm sorry that we all had to put up with all of that. I hope that everybody did listen carefully, though. I do hope that you listened carefully to what he said. I want to begin by, as he got there closer to the end, he talked about some people not qualified to marry. Jeff, did you catch that? There are people who should not be married.
Yeah.
Forbid them from marrying. Does that mean that that you're forbidding marriage and violating Paul's statement in 1 Timothy 4, 1 through 5? Hold on. Yes, caller, you're on the air. Can I?
That you're forbidding marriage and violating.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. How you doing?
Doing fine.
Okay, the guy said something about the guy did say something that he made a point on being unequally yoked. He made a point on being can you hear me?
Yeah, Ernest, let us deal with it, right, Ernest? Okay, you can call back on another day if you want to talk about something.
I know. I'm talking about something I want to say. Well, I just want to make a statement real quick, kind of.
Okay, make it quick.
Because it's something that did to my heart, and we all have to understand that it doesn't give me the right to divorce and go, you still be selfish. Would you be selfish if you still want to be with that person unequally yoked or what? And Jesus said, except it be for fornication? I heard him say something to that. What is the reasoning and the logic and all that?
Yes, sir.
It wouldn't do what's right toward God most of all, but that's all I want to say.
Okay, thank you.
Good day.
Yes, sir. Okay. And Ernest is making the same point, by the way. There are people who are not permitted to be married by Jesus and Paul. True or false? So when we say that a person cannot be married because they have once been married and unscripturally divorced, therefore they're not lawfully permitted to be married by Scripture, we're not violating 1 Timothy 3:4 either, or 4:3 either. If Jesus taught that some could not marry, and Paul taught that some could not marry, then it should be obvious that Robert is misapplying 1 Timothy 4 and verse 3.
This is a simple, basic hermeneutical principle. Jesus stated it in Matthew 16. With regard to the gospel as a whole, whatsoever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven. Whatsoever you shall loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. If we're preaching the gospel, we're not binding and loosing. We're not forbidding or allowing anything other than what has already been allowed or already has been loosed. 1 Timothy 4, verse 3 is talking about binding what God has loosed or loosing what God has bound. So he's just got that whole thing turned upside down.
Right.
Another point I'd like to make, Don, if I may,
Please.
is as he was going through the last half of that, he's got Matthew 19 and Mark 10 just backwards. He talks about committing adultery against her, but then he says fornication is incest. Well, how can according to him, the only way a man can commit adultery against her is if he puts her away without a bill of divorcement and marries another woman. So that's when he commits adultery. But the passage says that when he does that and she marries another, well, she can do that. So here's a woman who obviously she can't commit adultery if she marries another man, or if she's having a sexual relationship with another man who's not her husband, and he puts her away, he never dealt with that sin, and yet the fellow who puts her away and he doesn't give her this bill of divorcement, he says, well, he's committing adultery. He's mixing up his terms. He's got adultery being one thing, fornication being something else, and then he flips them around and uses them the same way, or the opposite way. So he's just got this all turned inside out and upside down. And there's no way to be guilty of fornication unless you're committing incest, according to him.
Well,
and this is the most disgusting doctrine I've ever heard.
What about his little argument on, well, okay, if you're committing adultery, then you're going to be put to death. That's the law for adultery. So therefore, Jesus could have been talking about adultery there in Matthew 19:9. He couldn't have been talking about a wife cheating on her husband and then her husband finding out about it and her being unwilling to repent. That's not what he's talking about. Well, what do you say about that? What about adultery that's a stonable offense?
Well, according to him, if the man put away his wife and didn't give her the bill of divorcement, and that's how he commits adultery when he marries another woman without having given the first one the bill of divorcement, then he's guilty of adultery, and he ought to be stoned.
He needs to be stoned to death too.
Yeah, he needs to be stoned. And then look at what there with Jesus dealt with the woman taken in adultery. Yeah. And they brought her to him, and they wanted to stone her. She was taken in the act of adultery. Did he believe that she was married to a man who had divorced his former wife and not given her a bill of divorcement? Is that what they were dealing with? And this is absolutely absurd.
But you know what? There were requirements for someone to be stoned to death, and if there are not two or more witnesses, that couldn't happen. So
no.
that little quibble is off the table. That doesn't fit either. Robert, just kind of going back and working through some of this, he talks about this aspect of the law being rooted in Scripture on divorce. Okay, some may deny that the law permitted a divorced woman to remarry, but such as a denial is futile. What passage permits or allows a divorced woman to remarry? A woman who was put away for uncleanness, such as Deuteronomy 24. Was she permitted to marry again?
Well, he's going to say Deuteronomy 24.
Okay. And so if Deuteronomy 24 says that she can go be another man's wife, and that's okay with the Lord, then okay, he's got a point. But is that what it says?
No, that's not what it says.
Okay. It's interesting that he does mention Deuteronomy 24 and Jeremiah 3. This is God's law on divorce, as if God had always wanted, this was God's will from the beginning, that in order for a man to put away his wife, he had to write her a bill of divorcement. It's interesting, though, God's command in that text had to do with governing their rebellion. And what did Moses permit them to do? To write a bill of divorcement and send them away. That's what he permitted. But when she went out and she married another man, what did she become because of that?
She became she was unclean to start with once she was out of the house, and then to take her back would be an abomination there in verse 4.
An abomination. So, okay. There's nothing in that passage that says that she was qualified or eligible to marry another man. It just simply states a fact. This is what she did. She went out and married another man. Now, when she goes out and marries another man, that makes her defiled to the point, an abomination to the point that the first husband cannot take her back. That's all that means. It is not permitting that woman to go out and get remarried again. There is no passage in the Old Testament that permits a divorced woman, or divorced man for that matter, to go out and remarry again. Nothing in the Old Testament about that. And let me also add this, because Robert made the point that this is a timeless law. Really? I don't remember the law being all the way back in the garden where God made the original law. What was the original law?
Man shall leave his father and mother and cleave unto his wife, and they shall be one flesh.
Hey, man, my friend, there's a timeless law. There's the time.
That's Matthew 19:6.
And then Jesus made the implication from that whatsoever God has joined together, let not man put asunder. My friend, there's the timeless law. But God did, during the days of Moses, permit the hardened-hearted Jew who found some uncleanness in his wife to put her away and write her a bill of divorcement, sending her out of his house. That's what was permitted. That is not the law from the beginning. So there's a major problem right there with Robert's interpretation. Second point, he wants to go to Matthew 5 and verse 17 and talk about how Jesus fulfilled the law. He did. If he would have changed the law, then he'd have been stoned to death, probably right there on the spot. But wait a minute. I agree that Jesus didn't change the law. In this instance, I agree that Jesus didn't change the law. He clarified it. Now, there were two positions. Robert tends to think that there was only one position in the Jews. They all unilaterally held to the position that a man, as long as he wrote his wife a bill of divorcement, sent her out of his house, that was okay. She'd go marry somebody else. And that's not the case. There was another school of thought that took the position that the only way that a man could divorce his wife, give her a bill of divorcement and send her out of his house, is if he found some immoral sexual problem in her. She is committing fornication, or he found she wasn't a virgin, whatever it may be. And there are scriptures also that support that view. What did Joseph? Joseph could have put Mary away privately when he found an uncleanness in her, or that was his thought, right? He could have done exactly what Moses permitted in Deuteronomy 24. But Jesus isn't changing that law. What he's doing is he's clarifying it, Robert. He's not changing it. And the point is, you're wrong on Deuteronomy 24. That's the problem. What was the cause for the writ of divorce? Uncleanness. Now, Deuteronomy 24 doesn't specify what that uncleanness is. What were the Jewish concepts of that? Well, here's one. An indecent matter, a shameful thing, often has moral or sexual overtones, so most interpret this as referring to some kind of indecency. Sexual immorality was the most prevalent interpretation. So this is what the man finds in his wife. And so what does he do? He puts her away. He gives her a bill of divorcement, and he puts her away. So what we see is a description of what the man might do if he finds uncleanness in his wife. Well, what does he do? He puts her out of his house by giving her paper for divorce, and she goes and she becomes another man's wife. This text simply describes what the woman does after receiving a writ of divorce. It doesn't say that she can. Nothing in this text says that she can. And then,
or that she should, or that she will.
Exactly. Then it describes the woman's condition at that point, why she can no longer come back and be taken back by her first husband, because she has become an abomination. Robert doesn't have an argument in Deuteronomy 24 to support his position. So the giving of a piece of paper doesn't make everything okay. This, again, the law of Moses was governing a theocracy. And Jeff, you pointed out, it governs the civil aspect of the society. That's all that Moses is doing here. That's all this law is. It's governing their hardness of heart. This is not expressing God's will in the matter, per se. It's simply governing things as they are. Am I missing it there?
No, and this is where Robert misses it, and some of our brethren who would agree with us on the exception here, though who are not willing to acknowledge what Deuteronomy 24 is saying, that these two things are the same, or the consistency are consistent, is that the law did provide for the death of an adulterer and the adulteress. All right? That too is to be put to death at the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses. Now, let's just take Mary as the case. So here's Mary. She's found with child, not by Joseph, who was her betrothed. It's obvious that that in the eyes of Joseph, she has engaged in something whereby a child could be conceived, and most of us would understand that to be sexual relationship. He's not interpreting the miracle until the angel tells him what the miracle was.
Right.
He wants to put her away. A logical conclusion, but he doesn't know who the correspondent is. So he can't implement the law and say, look, I know that Mary committed adultery with X over here, and so therefore stone them both. That's not that couldn't be done. There wasn't the mouth of 2 witnesses that could confirm this. So there has to be some provision in the law for situations like this, and this is what God has done in Deuteronomy 24. And this is where people don't understand that adultery was punishable by death when both were known and could be found to kill one and not kill the other was unjust. Mm-hmm. And so this is the whole point here. So Robert's just off the wall here. He's out in left field, however you want to express it, with regard to the understanding here. Don't let me forget, I want to get to another thing, though, after you get further down in here.
Okay, all right. Well, Jeremiah 3, verse 8, he brought that up. God obeyed his own law. God uses the illustration of what the Jews were doing by putting away their unfaithful wives. Okay, Israel in this particular passage in Jeremiah 3 verse 8, they are the unfaithful wife. They have committed spiritual adultery. Okay, they were harlots, and they were, but of course in the context also, Judah was just as bad. So what was God fixing to do with Judah? And of course this whole thing has to do with them being taken away into captivity. But, okay, Robert made the argument a month or so ago, maybe more, that God divorced Israel, therefore Israel had a right to be married to Jesus. Since God divorced her, that proves that the woman who's put away has a right to remarry. And I think, Robert, I beat him pretty well off of that argument, because Jesus didn't marry the same Israel that God put away. So he's got a problem there. He still tried to answer Matthew 5. Robert really didn't deal with Matthew 5, but Matthew 5 and Matthew 19, both, I mean, Mark 10, all these passages do fit together. They say the same thing. Whoever divorces his wife, let him give her a certificate of divorce. That's what you've heard it said. But I say to you that whoever divorces his wife for any reason except sexual immorality. So the divorcing in verse 32, is that not the same thing as what he means in verse 31? I mean, whoever divorces his wife, that's apoluo right there. Okay, apoluo. And then he gives her a certificate of divorce. There's the paper. But in contrast to that, what does Jesus say? Whoever divorces his wife, what is that word there? That's apoluo. He causes her to commit adultery. Well, how does he cause her to commit adultery? She goes out and marries another man. She's divorced. She commits adultery. And Robert's whole argument hinges on, and in fact, I think Ashton made this point earlier in the comments. Robert's entire argument hinges on this word apoluo. He argues that since it doesn't mean divorce in and of itself, that Jesus is talking about two different things in the context of Matthew 19. No, that's not right. So, that which Moses permitted is that which God allowed for a period of time, but that's not his purpose. That's not the law. Okay, Jeff, what were you going to say? Go ahead and say it before you forget it. I'm sorry. Do you remember? Uh-oh. Jeff, can you hear me? Okay, tell you what, let's go on and look at this. This what we have shown that Apostle Paul, who answered questions from Christians about marriage, gave some straightforward answers that are easy to see if one is not reading them through the traditional lenses. He commanded to let every man and every woman have a spouse, and he gave the reason for it, which is the reason for it, which is to avoid fornication. He followed up by addressing the unmarried, which includes the divorced, by commanding, let them marry. So now Robert jumps over to 1 Corinthians chapter 7. To avoid fornication, let every man have his own wife. And then he talks about the unmarried. Who are the unmarried? There, Jeff is back now. Jeff, can you hear me now?
Yeah, I got it. Now I had to reboot.
Okay. I done jumped into 1 Corinthians chapter 7 here.
Okay, I'm with you.
And to avoid fornication, let every man have his own wife. Who are the unmarried in 1 Corinthians chapter 7, Jeff? Who are they?
Well, they're at the beginning of the chapter, they're those who've never married. They're virgins.
Okay.
And then later in the chapter, he there about verse 10, and then he talks about those who separate. And then later in the chapter, he talks about some who are divorced. But he doesn't give any authority to those who are divorced at the end of the chapter to remarry. So, where are you?
Robert, that's what Robert is asserting, isn't it? So, I was at the beginning. I'm at the beginning in 1 Corinthians 7.
Yeah.
And in 1 Corinthians chapter 7, of course, because of sexual immorality, let each man have his own wife, and let each woman have her own husband. Verse 8, it says, but I say to the unmarried and to the widows, it is good for them if they remain, even as I am. But if they cannot exercise self-control, let them, the unmarried, marry. For it's better to marry than to burn with passion. All right, so what Robert does is he puts the divorced in there into the same group as being unmarried. Of course, when he gets
anybody who doesn't have a spouse is what he's saying.
Anybody who doesn't have a spouse can be married. If they're not married, if they're legally divorced, if they've never been married, or if they are widows, they can remarry it. That's his argument. Of course, verse 10 says, now to the married I command, yet not I, but the Lord, a wife is not to depart from her husband. Now, Robert argues that this is not divorce. This is just the wife getting sick of her husband and she walks out of the house. But notice what Paul calls her. But even if she does depart, let her what? Remain
unmarried.
Is she unmarried or is she not unmarried?
She's unmarried.
Is she married or is she not? Yeah, she is married. She is unmarried. So whatever took place in verse 10 caused her to become unmarried. But she is to remain unmarried, according to the Apostle Paul, or be reconciled to his husband. Of course, Robert makes the quibble, well, doesn't say that she's to be married again to her husband. No, she is either to remain unmarried or be reconciled to her husband. Who is the unmarried in 1 Corinthians chapter 7? Well, verse 8 says, but I say to the unmarried and to the widows. So you've got two groups here, the widows and the unmarried. We understand the widows are not married. So who is the other unmarried group? 1 Corinthians 7 verse 11 says, let her remain unmarried. Well, she's the put away wife. She is to remain unmarried. Paul's teaching that is Paul forbidding her to marry? She's unmarried. Is Paul forbidding her to marry, Jeff?
Well, she was married, and now she's unmarried, and he says either remain unmarried or be reconciled. And so if you take Robert's position, he is forbidding her to marry. And he's got Paul contradicting himself later in the chapter.
Yep. All right.
Let me point something else out here right now.
Do it.
This is exactly and perfectly in harmony with Deuteronomy 24. Because the woman in Deuteronomy 24 that's discussed, if she goes and becomes another man's, if she does it, well, there's someone there who doesn't do it, you see.
Yep.
And so they could be reckoned. The only one he couldn't take back is the one who went and married and became another man's wife. There's nothing here contradicting even what Deuteronomy 24 says. And Robert doesn't see that.
Yep. Verse 32, he who is unmarried cares for the things of the Lord, how he may please the Lord. Okay. So he's unmarried. There is a difference, verse 34, between a wife, okay, and a virgin. Now, there's your contrast. The unmarried woman cares about the things of the Lord. Well, who's the unmarried here in verse 34?
She's not a wife.
Yeah, she's not a wife. She's a virgin. The unmarried woman cares about the things of the Lord, that she may be holy both in body and spirit. So this context presents us with who the unmarried are, those who have never been married or those who are widows. Those are the unmarried. And, of course, the divorced woman is a woman who has been, well, okay, let's just use Robert's words, put away. She, however, is unmarried, and Paul says she cannot remarry.
Married.
She can be reconciled to her husband, but that's the end of it.
But she has a husband, doesn't she?
That is right.
She's unmarried, but she has a husband.
She's unmarried, but she has a husband. Robert argues that in verses 27 and 28, that those who are bound, married, and then loosed, divorced, and stated the loosed do not marry if they do not sin if they marry. Okay, so what about that little argument? Let's deal with that one too.
Art thou bound unto a wife? Well, who's bound to a wife?
Somebody who's married.
All right, somebody who has a wife. If a wife can have a husband and be unmarried, can a husband have a wife and be unmarried?
Well, I guess so.
Why not? Yeah, so now here's the point, but they're bound, aren't they? Here's an unmarried woman, but she still has a husband. Here's an unmarried man, but he still has a wife. They're bound. This is what people don't see. Why are they bound? Because they swore an oath before God that until death do us part, I will keep this covenant.
Yeah. So
that's who he's talking about, the one bound. Art thou loose from a wife? Seek not a wife. Well, a man who has a wife, you see, Paul's telling him not to seek another wife. See, it doesn't make any sense what Robert is saying. He has to deny the obvious conclusion there up in verse 11 with regard to reconciliation. So here's a couple that are unreconciled, but they have a husband or a wife. They're bound to one another, and he says, seek not a wife. So the bond that's being discussed there in verse 27 is the marriage bond, and he's not talking talking about divorce or fell loose from a wife.
So, verse 28 then, when he says, but even if you do marry, you have not sinned. Who has not sinned?
The virgin.
Okay. And if the virgin does marry, she has not sinned. Okay. I do think that you've got both the men and women being discussed here, and he is context dealing with virgins, people who have not been married, in contrast with people who have been, and people who have not been married. You have not sinned if you marry, but if you are married, don't seek to be loosed, and if you are, seek a wife. But if you've never been married, you have not sinned, and the virgin, that, by the way, is talking about the woman, she's not sinned. Okay. So, nevertheless, such will have trouble in the flesh because of the current distress. So, there's no authorization there for a divorced person or someone who is married to be married to somebody else. It's not there. A person who's married, don't seek to be loosed. And if you are loosed, don't seek a wife. That's his instruction to those who are married or have been married. Am I right there?
You're exactly right. There's nothing in this context. I mean, here's Robert's position, and I'm not gonna make this up. Here's a fella who has a wife, and his doctrine justifies it. Here's a fella who has a wife, and he does it for some reason. He puts her away, or actually, let's get real specific. He's committing immoral or illicit sexual acts. All right, he's having sex with somebody other than his wife, and he decides he's going to divorce her, and then he's going to marry the woman that he's been in this immoral relationship with, and so he divorces the first one, and God approves of him marrying the second one because she divorced her husband so they could have one another. What kind of doctrine is that?
Permissive.
Exactly, and that's what his doctrine does. It permits people who no longer want to be, and he says in his stuff, he talks about not being faithful. Well, what does that mean? He says they weren't unfaithful. Well, what were they? If they were having illicit or immoral sexual relationships with someone other than their spouse, and in my book, that's adultery. But in his book, that just means they didn't give their wife a piece of paper.
Now, on this next chart here, okay, so this is dealing with Mark 10:3. We have shown that the exception clause is not about he keeps saying we have shown, and he hasn't shown anything. He just asserts, he assumes and asserts, just like all false teachers do. And of course, he references to all of his writings and junk on his Total Health website. And I guess he wants everybody to go and read everything that he said, because it's there that he's allegedly supported all this stuff or defended all this stuff and shown all this stuff. But he hasn't shown anything. He's just assuming this stuff and throwing it out there. But he says that a woman or a man is not guilty of adultery against her if he ends the relationship without divorcing. What?
That doesn't. If he ends the relationship with so the only way he can be guilty of adultery is if he divorces her. But he says no. He's even contradicting himself, because the only way you can commit adultery is to send her out of the house without the writ of divorcement. So here's a man, he sends her away, and he goes and marries another woman. Well, that's adultery. But if he doesn't send her away and he goes sleeps with his neighbor's wife, that's not adultery.
Or I think what he's saying is, okay, so he sends her away without giving her the proper writ of divorce, and she goes and becomes another man's wife, then he's committing adultery against her in that act. Although again, that's Mark 10:3, and he's flipping it around on, So
he's guilty of adultery when she's having sex with another man?
Yeah, because he made her do it, I guess, and that would tie into Matthew 5:30, 31, 32, causing her to commit adultery. But what you've done is you put her in a position that she's going to become another man's wife. so she can take care of herself. And that, by the way, that's putting her in that position.
But he didn't. Oh man, I'm sorry.
Yeah, the applicable case would be when the relationship involves fornication, not where one has been unfaithful. He gives Ezekiel 10:11, Matthew 14.
So, and fornication is incest. Matthew 14 is Herod having his brother Philip's wife, and 1 Corinthians 5 is the man who had his father's wife.
Yeah.
So the only way you can commit fornication is be guilty of incest, according to Robert Waters.
Well, of course, if Herod were to put away his brother Philip's wife, he could do that without giving her a bill of divorcement and just send her away in the relationship. I think that's what he's arguing. But in reality, that's what he's arguing. Matthew 19:9 is saying that if you just throw your wife out the door, then if she's not your rightful wife, you can do that. But if she's your rightful wife, you have to give her a bill of divorcement. Then she can go and become another man's wife, and you can go become another woman's husband, and everything is just fine. It's all about that piece of paper. And then he gets into Matthew 19. Okay. His chart here on Matthew 19, the text does not support the divorce, committing adultery upon marrying again. He goes to Matthew 19 and he talks about the Pharisees and their view. What is their question about? At the very end, he made the point that maybe they were talking about legal divorce and maybe they weren't. But he passed that off as it doesn't matter. Well, I say that they've got in the beginning in their mind Deuteronomy 24. And they're trying to pit Jesus against the two different schools of thought on Deuteronomy 24. Is what they're trying to do. So Jesus goes back to the beginning. Notice this statement. Jeff, what do you say about this? Man can't dissolve a marriage his way, but that doesn't mean God's way can't dissolve a marriage.
I say amen.
Okay, so
that's the whole point. That's the whole point of the context. They were asking, well, what do you mean? You can't put your wife away for every cause? No, you can't put your wife away for every cause.
Absolutely. And if you put her away because she burned the biscuits and you write her a bill of divorcement, have you put her away God's way?
No. But according to them, according to Roberts, you have. He never discusses what Deuteronomy 24 says about uncleanness.
No, he uses that he starts with a false premise, a false assumption, and then he rides that pony all the way through. And
so what he does is he twists what Jesus says about fornication and adultery while ignoring what Moses said in Deuteronomy 24 about uncleanness, when if he would acknowledge what Moses said, he could understand what Jesus is saying.
Exactly. So he then says, first we observe that the writing of divorcement was a command. Okay. What about that? In fact, I got a chart on that. Let me pull that up for a second here. Look at this. Here you go. In verse 8 of Matthew 19, Jesus says, Moses, because of the hardness of your hearts, permitted you to divorce your wives, but from the beginning it was not so. And I say to you that whoever divorces his wife, except for such... Okay, pause. Sorry, I apologize, Robert. Let me use the word put away. Permitted you to put away your wives, but from the beginning it was not so. So putting away your wife is okay. Permitted by Moses, but that wasn't the way it was from the beginning. I guess the divorce decree, though, as long as you wrote her a bill of divorcement, that was okay from the beginning, Jeff. And I say to you, whoever puts away his wife, except for sexual immorality, and marries another, commits adultery. And whoever marries her who is divorced or put away commits adultery. Well, notice something here over in Mark's account. And Jesus answered and said, because of the hardness of your heart, he wrote you this precept. The precept, which Robert is saying as a command, okay? These are the same things. This was given because of the hardness of your heart. God permitted it. He wrote the precept because of the hardness of your hearts. He permitted you to do that which you were bound and determined to do anyway. That doesn't mean he approves of it.
Well, Robert acts as if they were commanded to divorce their wives. And that's how the Pharisees are a problem. Moses said we had to do it. No. Moses said that this is the grounds upon which you may do it. You were doing all kinds of things, and Moses restricted what they were doing. That's what these folks don't get, is that Moses is narrowing their practice. They were doing just exactly what the law was intended to prevent them from doing, to try and restrict them in their practice. If men want to do what's right, they would recognize what the law allowed. Just like in our society, there was a time when the only way a person could get a divorce was if one or the other of the spouses was guilty of adultery. But just in our lifetime, Don, you know how liberalized that has become. So now we have in every state in the union no-fault divorce. You got no-fault insurance, you got no-fault divorce, and all a person has to do is say, I want a divorce, and the judge says you have it. And so this is where we've gotten to, and this is what these Jews are saying. Well, why can't I put her away as long as I give her a bill of divorce? And Jesus says, because that's not what God intended. And I don't know why people can't figure that out.
What you got is Robert agreeing with the Pharisees who are arguing with Jesus, who are wanting to make the liberal application of Deuteronomy 24. Robert's agreeing with them, and when Jesus is trying to bring them back and say, no, we've got to go back to the beginning. Here's God's original intent. This is God's original plan. This is God's command. By the way, I want you to notice something else. In verse 3 of Mark 10, here's where me and Robert are going to differ. I don't know what your view is on this, Jeff, but Jesus asked, what did Moses command you? Of course, the first thing that pops into Robert's mind when he reads that in Mark 10 and verse 3 is Deuteronomy 24. The first thing that pops into my mind is, Genesis 2.
Yeah, there you go.
What did Moses command you? Well, here's the beginning. Go all the way back to the beginning. In fact, that's exactly what he does in verse 5. Notice, because of the hardness of your heart, he wrote you this precept. But from the beginning of creation, God
There's
made
that contradicting conjunction.
Whew.
See, he doesn't even read this context like it ought to be read. They ask a question, and is it lawful to put away, tempting him, is it lawful for a man to put away his wife? And he said to them, he answered with the question, what did Moses command you? And they said, Moses suffered to write a bill of divorcement, put away. They went to Deuteronomy 24.
Yep.
And Jesus answered and said to them, well, Moses, for the hardness of your heart, wrote you that precept. But, and now he's going to answer his own question, but from the beginning of the creation, God made them male and female. Now, who said that?
Yeah.
Who said that? Moses said that.
Yep.
And so Jesus answers his own question. So you are spot on that Jesus affirms the universal original intent of marriage and puts Moses in the back seat on that.
In verse 9, therefore what God has joined together, let not man separate. There's the conclusion.
And that's what Moses said too.
Yep. So, okay. Then this is where he said, by giving the reason or need for divorce, hardness of hearts, is it oh, wait a minute. This is good. By giving the reason or need for divorce. Okay, notice that word right there by Robert. Divorce. Hardness of heart. Okay, is it reasonable to conclude that Jesus at that instant changed what God had established? Notice, it was not divorce that was permitted, but putting away. So Robert says, okay, the reason for divorce was the hardness of hearts. But then he says, that's not what was because of the hardness of hearts in verse 8. Robert, maybe that's just a typo. Okay. By giving the reason or need for putting away is what that word ought to say, because that's what your argument is. Because of the hardness of heart, Moses permitted you to put away your wives, but his command is to divorce them. That's your argument, Robert. So you're equivocating right here. When I asked you that question a year ago, I guess you thought about it, because you come back and say he permitted the putting away, but not the divorce, because he commanded the divorce. You're mixed up, Robert.
You see that? But you see, that's ridiculous. God permitted that men could just live promiscuously, but he commanded a divorce.
Now, what about this little argument here? What would be accomplished by punishing couples who separate? Marriage only for the one who initiates it, or for fornication, promotes a race to the courthouse and is counterproductive.
Oh, just fill in the blank on that. Having to have a bill of divorcement creates a race to the courthouse and is counterproductive. What's sauce for the goose is sauce for the gander. He doesn't have an argument there.
He's appealing.
The only way to avoid adultery is everybody go to the courthouse.
He's appealing to emotion here by, well, what's the punishment? It's just wrong to hold people accountable to their covenant. That's just not reasonable to hold people accountable for their promises and their vows that they made on their wedding day. We just can't do that.
Let me jump in right here, okay? Because that's the part of Matthew 19 he didn't deal with. Because he got down there and said, well, the disciples said it'd be good not to marry. And Jesus said that all men cannot receive this saying, save they to whom it was given. And he stopped right there at verse 11. And I notice what Matthew 19, I'm talking about when Robert was quoting this, he quit at verse 11. After he made this emotional argument on they can't live this way, it's too hard with them. Well, Jesus evidently didn't know that. And when I debated Dr. Charlie Earhart on homosexuality, he made this argument, said, well, Jesus never condemned homosexuality. I said, Dr. Earhart, and he's arguing the approval for it from Matthew 19. I said, Dr. Earhart, you need to read verse 12. Because Jesus, now listen to me, Jesus told his disciples that they needed to live just like he was living. And this helps me understand why Roberts is whacked out as he is on continuous cleansing, because he doesn't think we can follow Jesus. But that's exactly what Jesus is saying in Matthew 19:12. For there are some eunuchs which were born so from their mother's womb, and there are some eunuchs which are made eunuchs of men, and there be eunuchs which have made themselves eunuchs for the kingdom of heaven's sake. Now, Jesus said men could do it. Men could take the consequences of his teaching, which is celibacy, not engaging in sexual activity, and become celibate and serve the kingdom of heaven. That's exactly what Paul said in 1 Corinthians 7. You should be just like I am. And if you're like I am, you won't have any trouble in the flesh, but what? You will serve God faithfully. Robert denies the words of Jesus. He was chastising you, Don, for denying the words of Jesus and not being willing to teach the gospel. And that if a fellow really believed the gospel, really believed the doctrine of Christ, he'd stand up and tell the truth, regardless of the consequences of what anybody else thought about it. Well, Robert, why don't you do that? Why don't you, first of all, read what Jesus said, and then after you read what Jesus said, admit that the Lord Jesus Christ showed us just exactly how to live according to this teaching. Jesus lived a perfect, sinless life, and part of that sinlessness involved his sexual purity because he chose not to marry. Now, answer that, Robert. That's the one thing you won't do is deal with what the Bible says, and that this is the reality. So don't go around telling people, oh, it's so you want to go to heaven, you want to serve the kingdom of God, you'll do what you ought to do and do what you have to do, because that's the most important thing.
And sometimes, you know what? It does hurt. And we are to deny ourselves and take up our cross and follow Jesus. And sometimes that means that we're going to have to suffer through this life. And what, instead of placating to man's carnal nature, carnal desires, and their rebellion against God, and just saying, okay, go ahead, God will forgive you anyway, what we need to realize is that to truly follow Christ means that we are going to deny ourselves. And if that means I'm in a position and a circumstance where, somebody's done me wrong, and I am in a position where I can't remarry again, am I going to put Christ first? Am I going to adhere to his demand for purity, or am I going to satisfy my flesh? That's really the question, isn't it? So
the only question.
That you can't appeal to just emotion. In fact, I think, his argument then on verse 9, only when you insert divorce in place of put away are you faced with a serious hermeneutical problem. You're talking about hermeneutical problems. When you start dissecting a text up like Robert has dissected this text, instead of just reading through the text and following the line of thought, you have to cut it up with a penknife to where, putting it back together is going to be impossible. That's what Robert's done with it. You just read the text. It doesn't read like Robert wants it to read. That's his problem. Even if you did say put away instead of divorce every time. Listen, you've got to understand, Jesus is dealing with the problem of putting your wife away for any cause. That includes divorce, whether you give her a certificate of divorce or not, because Jesus goes back to the beginning, and here's your standard that you're ignoring. Follow the standard. Robert just cuts this up into so many different pieces. He was addressing the false notions of the Jews, and it's interesting to me. Again, Robert accepts the false notion of the Jews. He's on their side.
Yeah.
And what about this? At his trial, nobody accused Jesus of contradicting the law when it came to divorce and remarriage. The problem, Robert, is that there were those in the Jewish community who said that Deuteronomy 24 is exactly what Jesus is saying it is in Matthew 19, that the only justifiable cause for divorce is sexual immorality. Jesus isn't changing the law in this regard. He is stressing and emphasizing that you've misunderstood the law, you Pharisees. Now, let me tell you the way the cow ate the cabbage. Go back to Genesis chapter 2. This is God's design. This is God's purpose. You do this. And if somebody puts away their wife for any cause other than fornication, we're going to clarify Deuteronomy 24 for you. If you put your wife away for any cause other than fornication and you marry somebody else, you've committed adultery. And I think we just lost Jeff again. He's probably wore out. His phone may have died. We've gone longer than we intended to. But, anytime that you're taking apart somebody's teaching that's not according to Scripture, it takes more time. It's kind of like, putting a brand new fishing line into onto your fishing rod is a lot easier than untangling a tangled up fishing line. Or going in and building a building from scratch is a lot easier than remodeling. Okay, because you got to tear out all the stuff. It's much more difficult and it takes a lot more time. So what a false teacher can say in 18 minutes, how long does it usually take to undo all of that?
Elmer Moore used to say he'd make a little simple argument on like faith only, and he said says a fella can make that argument in less than 45 seconds and take me make a bigger mess than I can clean up in 4 hours.
Yeah, and that's true. It does take a whole lot more time to clean up a mess than to make one. So, all right, that argument's done with. Let's see. Whoever shall sin. This is his paraphrase of verse 9, Jeff. What do you think about that?
Okay, again, and he quotes the Good News Bible, I think it is, and illicit relationships and all that stuff. So whoever shall send his wife out of the house and marry another commits adultery against her. All right? So the man commits adultery when he marries another woman unless he sent her away because of fornication. All right? So the only way to commit adultery, or not to commit adultery, is to send her away for fornication. Well, who's committing the fornication?
And according to Robert, I hear both of them were.
Yeah.
Both of them were in the illicit relationship.
Exactly. Which is being committed because of the unlawful relationship.
Woo.
Well, if she, remember, the text says because of some uncleanness in her, he sends her away. This fellow's not authorized to send anyone away while he's committing adultery. The ridiculousness of what Robert is trying to say here, and the hermeneutical difficulties that he puts himself into, he's justifying fornication on the part of the man and making the woman responsible for his for being sent out of the house. But he can justify it if he gives her a bill of divorcement because he's committing fornication. And if that's not what he believes, then he needs to learn how to paraphrase better.
So, when Moses was referenced, the Pharisees responded by specifically mentioning both put away and bill of divorcement, demonstrating their awareness that Jesus was not falling for their trap and was instead redirecting the conversation. I'm glad I'm not a mind reader, because I think I'd really have a hard time unraveling.
Well, we've already addressed this point by showing that Robert didn't deal with the context. Jesus redirects the conversation, but he answers his own question, the one that they refused to answer.
Yeah.
He was asking for a Genesis 2:24 answer, and they gave him a Deuteronomy 24:1 answer. He says, no, Genesis 2:24, one man, one woman for one lifetime. That's what Moses said.
Yeah, he's cutting up the text and making distinctions where there's really no difference, actually, in the way that these terms and concepts are being used. He's making a distinction without a difference. But Jesus said fornication, not adultery, and it refers to unlawful marriages rather than divorce eligibility. So again, if we're talking about unlawful marriages, then they're both going to be guilty. There is no innocent party. They're both guilty. And so...
Which is the illustration I gave earlier. Here's a man who's having sex with his neighbor's wife, and he divorces his wife, and she divorces her husband, and they give them their bills of divorcement, and so now those two fornicators, that's what I'd call them, those two adulterers, they can marry one another, and it's not adultery anymore.
So, okay, let them marry, avoid, we'll get into that. Okay, man. Taking a lot longer than I wanted it to today, but the Greek word apostasion is the Greek word for bill of divorcement, and actually biblios, apostasion is the way you write her a bill of divorcement. You go back in the Septuagint, Deuteronomy chapter 24. So Robert's saying, as long as you give her this piece of paper, everything's okay, and if you don't give her this piece of paper, then you're still married, and if she goes and becomes another man's wife, she commits adultery. I understand. That's what Robert is saying. The problem is that the Lord Jesus Christ is using both of these terms to denote the same problem or same issue as discussed in Deuteronomy 24. The effect of the divorce paper being given to the woman is that she is sent out of his house. So Jesus is making the argument and using the sent out of her house or out of his house or put away to refer to the divorce process. I understand that the word apoluo in and of itself does not necessitate or mean divorce in and of itself, but it is used many times to describe that process. Every scholar recognizes that. So, I mean, we could go through and we could look at all of them and point them out. I think the easiest thing to do, though, is just look at the text. So I'm going to skip through, look at all those definitions, by the way. But, okay. Matthew 19 and verse 3 says, the Pharisees also came to him, testing him and saying to him, is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife for just any reason? Apoluo. That's the question. Jesus' response was, have you not read? Okay. Chorizo is the Greek word there for let not man separate. So is he talking about divorce there, Jeff, or is he talking about just putting her out of your house without giving her a bill of divorcement? Therefore,
so then they that are no longer two, but one flesh, therefore when one joined together, let not man separate. I was trying to read the fine print there. All right. Well, he made the argument earlier that we could only separate according to God's authority. All right. So any separation that doesn't conform to what Jesus says in this passage is what's prohibited.
Yeah. So they said to him, why then did Moses command to give a certificate of divorce? Did they understand what Jesus was saying? Sure they did. They understood that Jesus.
Sure they did, yeah.
You shouldn't divorce your wife.
They're asking Jesus. Jesus' answer is based on Genesis 2, let not man separate. So now they said, well, why did Moses say that?
Yeah.
If there's no divorce at all, why did Moses say that? And Moses said, well, because of the hardness of your heart. Yep. And then Jesus, he expresses the exception in this context. There after verse 6, where he gives the let not man put asunder, all right? And they ask the question, he said, well, Moses, because hardness of your heart, but whosoever shall put away his wife, except it be for fornication. If and only if it is for fornication. It is a true exception. Everything else is wrong. Well, we go back to Deuteronomy 24. What did Moses say was allowed? Uncleanness.
Yeah, that takes you to verse 8, right? I mean, Matthew 19, Moses, because of the hardness of your heart, permitted you to divorce your wives. And we've already shown that a parallel to that in Mark's account of Mark 10, that precept. He gave you this precept. He wrote you this precept. That's what was given because of the hardness of your hearts. So I don't care how Robert wants to define the word apoluo. The reality is Jesus is using it here in verse 8 to refer to the writing of the bill of divorcement and putting her away.
And that is the Mosaic precept.
Yes. That is what Mark says is the precept that he wrote. And this is what Jesus said they permitted. Moses never permitted them just to send their wives out of the house and not give them a bill of divorcement. Never. He didn't do that. But he did permit them to write a bill of divorcement and send them away. That's what he permitted. And when somebody, verse 9 says, I say to you, whoever does that which Moses permitted to his wife, except for sexual immorality, and marries another, commits adultery, and whoever marries her who is the object of doing that which Moses permitted commits adultery.
Verse 7 in Matthew 19 and verse 4 in Mark 10, they're to be understood sequentially.
Yeah.
In other words, write a bill of divorcement and to put her away. There was no sending her out of the house, according to the precept, without the bill of divorcement. And Robert says, well, that's the thing that the law was supposed to correct, sending her out of the house without the bill of divorcement. Okay, we agree on that. And he understands that these are sequential. They both go together. Right? And then they both go together, and we agreed on that. You can't have one without the other, so we need to stop talking about that. And that constitutes a divorce. The piece of paper is not the divorce. They're not separated until she goes out of the house. So the the legal procedure and the actual removal of the wife from the house, right, that is a divorce. The writing of divorcement. The writing is proof of the act. I mean, that's the whole point. Now, Jesus says there's only one reason they could do that. And Robert wants to try and make verse 9, he wants to separate verse 9 from what the precept is. And he says Jesus is not giving a different interpretation, and I agree with him. And I say unto you, whosoever shall put away his wife, if and only if for fornication, and marry another, commits adultery. And he would have it be, well, no, he commits adultery when he sends her out without the paper. No, Jesus is saying he commits adultery when he sends her out with the paper, unless he sent her out because of fornication. He's never analyzed that text in all of his hemming and hawing and digging his toe in the ground over however many years this has been. We've listened to him.
Yeah. So, okay. The putting away permitted by Moses in Matthew 19 is the Deuteronomy 24, 1 through 4 concept of divorcing your wife. That's what the writing of divorcement, the putting away here is describing that throughout Matthew 19. Jesus is not talking about putting away without the writ of divorcement anywhere in Matthew 19. Okay? The concession that was allowed by Moses, okay, the Mosaic law, was given because of the hardness of their hearts. It wasn't given because that was God's original plan from the beginning. God's original plan was one man, one woman for life. That's God's original plan. That plan has never changed. The law was given in Deuteronomy 24 to govern rebellion against God's original law. So there is no doubt that the Pharisees' question in Matthew 19 and verse 3, which uses the term apoluo, was in their mind the same as apostasyon and apoluo in verse 7. And there is also no doubt that when Jesus responds to them in verses 8 and 9, he's using the term apoluo just as they were, and that he is speaking of what the Jews referred to in verse 7, apostasyon and apoluo, in Deuteronomy 24, verses 1 through 4. Jesus isn't cutting them up and looking at it from all these different perspectives. He's simply defining and clarifying the passage in Deuteronomy 24. Now, all of that to be said, when you think about Matthew 19, Matthew 5, 31, 32, 1 Corinthians chapter 7, haven't even talked about Romans chapter 7. You put all of these passages together, and clearly, Robert's right about picking and choosing certain passages and letting one verse or one passage define your belief on a particular subject. He's right about that. We have to take everything that the New Testament says, but we have to harmonize it. And what Robert has done is he has taken it and dissected it and cut it up, redefined terms, or ignored certain definitions of terms, forced definitions of terms to fit his teaching, instead of accepting the flow of language and how the terms are being used in context and the way that the terms are being used from one context to another context. He misses the boat completely. I think we've been fair to Robert. I think we've allowed him to speak, and we've answered him. We haven't answered every single quibble, and I know he's made over the years many different quibbles, many different arguments, and they're all on his website. The problem is he starts with a foundational problem, a fundamental misunderstanding, and a false premise. So I tell you what, I think if we clear up the Greek word apoluo and how it should be used in Matthew 19, it just takes everything out from under him anyway. He's toast. He's done. So what else you got to say, Jeff?
Thank you, Don. You did a good job, and I enjoyed being your wingman today.
Well, Hey, Jeff, thank you for being with me this afternoon. And I know that you and Robert had a debate scheduled or planned um, on continuous cleansing. And of course, he going around telling everybody that you backed out of that debate. And he didn't want to have it where I preach. So I guess we're not going to ever have a debate on continuous cleansing with Robert Waters because I guess you backed out, right?
Well, I didn't back out. Robert, and I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt, all right? Though I don't think, I can't imagine why he would do something like this. He says, when he published that second set of propositions, which was actually it's the original set, and I rejected it offhand. I told him, I'm not going to sign that because that has me saying something that I agree with. And I made the point and showed him that here's the thing, that you've got to affirm even as he sins, or similar language to that. I sent him a proposition saying that. And he never, he signed those or didn't sign them, I don't know what, but when we got down to trying to discuss it, he said, well, I agreed to those, but he sent that second set out, the ones that I said I wouldn't sign. So I'm not going to sign what he was publishing. I've published what I would sign, what I will defend. If somebody else wants to sign on in his place, we'll talk about it. But I am not providing him anybody else an audience or anything like that, and I'm not going to burden the church out there at Alexander with it. And so I happily debate the subject with a qualified representative. But that's the point. Nobody wants to step up and sign a proposition that says God forgives our sins while we are sinning, or even as we sin. They don't want to do that. They got whipped on it in 83 or whatever year it was, and they have been suffering over it ever since, and they've learned not to sign that. But that's the only one I'm going to sign because that's what they believe, that the blood of Jesus Christ is cleansing them even as they are sinning. And they can define what they mean by sinning. I know they don't believe high-handed sins are cleansed, but they do believe that their sins of weakness and inadvertence, unintentional sins, those are cleansed while they're actually committing those sins. And so if they can come up and debate something like that, I'll be happy to debate them because that's what they believe.
Okay, well, thank you for the clarification on that. And Jeff, tell everybody where you preach at. And I know you're out visiting right now, your family and stuff, and so you're not even at home. But where do you preach at on the Lord's Day?
Well, when I'm not banged up and laying in the bed recovering from self-inflicted injuries, I'm preaching over in Haynesville, Louisiana. I started out there 40-odd years ago when I was just a boy preacher, and then when I moved back to Nacogdoches in East Texas and started my business, during COVID, they needed somebody to come preach for them because their preacher they had, Johnny Hines, needed to go back up to the Midwest and take care of his folks. They'd gotten sick. And so I started going over there and with a couple of others, and eventually just got down to me. And so every week I go over from Nacogdoches to Haynesville, stay the weekend, and work with them on the weekend. And it's been a great thing. They're a wonderful group of people, and they treat me so nice and kind. I really appreciate them. But every Sunday I try to hold forth over there at the Woodland Church of Christ at 4199 East Alternate 2 in Haynesville, Louisiana.
Well, if anybody's down in that area, I hope they'll look you up. And it's been good to be with you today. We've got some comments appreciative of our efforts this afternoon, so that's good. Appreciate everybody who's joined us. As always, hope and pray that you'll be able to come back on Monday afternoon at 3 p.m. and join us again. But Jeff, man, it's been good to be with you this afternoon. Thank you for joining me. And we I know maybe, I hope people don't think that we just doubled up on Robert, but he's been discussing this with both of us, and both of us have something to say about it and have a hand in it. And So I thought it'd be good if you would join me, and thank you for graciously accepting. Appreciate it.
I appreciate you, brother.
All right. Well, Lord willing, see everyone on Monday afternoon at 3 p.m. Till then, may God bless you. Hope that you have a great rest of the day, and we will be seeing you and talking with you soon, Lord willing.
All right.
Thanks, Jim.
Just as I am without one plea, but that thy blood was shed for me, and that thou bidst me come to thee, O Lamb of God, I come, just as I am, and waiting not to rid my soul of one dark blot, to thee whose blood can cleanse each spot, O Lamb of God, I come, I come broken to be mended, I come wounded to be healed, I come desperate to be rescued, I come empty to be filled, I come guilty to be pardoned by the blood of Christ the Lamb, and I'm welcome with open arms, praise God, just as I am, just as I am, I would be lost, but mercy and grace my freedom bought, and now to glory in your cross, O Lamb of God, I come, I come broken to be mended, I come wounded